Hey there, in this lesson we're going to learn about the NVL function, okay? And that's a function that's used to replace data that is empty with something else, okay? So in the output, right, let's do a select. Let me show you exactly what this is. If we do a select star from emp, highlight this, or you don't even have to highlight it, it's the only statement, just hit run. Notice that it gives us the data in the table. Certain cells are empty, okay? You can tell by this dash here. Using this tool, Oracle Apex, it basically represents empty cells with this dash here. And if you were using Toad or some other tool, such as SQL Developer, that will actually show empty cells. So, but in this case, with this tool, it's showing us dashes. But this is basically empty data, right? There's nothing in here. And if you remember from a couple of lessons ago, no data means NULL, null. All right, so these are actually null values in these cells. So we need to represent these in a better way in this report output, right? Rather than having no cells, I can at least, for example, this is commission, right? Commission. So we can show zeros for this. King, Blake, Clark, they don't make any commission. So instead of having just an empty cell in the output of this report, I can actually have a 0. And the way we can do that is, well, let's select a few columns, the ename column, the job, the sal, and then the commission from, let me put from on the next line, from emp, where the emp no is in one of these IDs. Okay, so let me select a few empty commissions and some employees that do have commissions. So I can select 7839. This employee does not make commission. 7698. He doesn't make commission either. 7566. This employee also does not make any commission. But 7654. Right, where is this guy? 7654, Martin does make a commission. All right, so just to see how this data looks, highlight this and hit run, and notice that we got Martin. He's the only one that makes a commission. Blake, King, and Jones, this is actually null values here. So we need to show a 0 here, and the way we could do that is we can use the NVL function. We can do NVL. And then the first argument is the column that we want to replace with a more meaningful value rather than just an empty cell. We can actually have the number 0 there, okay? And now highlight that and hit run. And notice that every time it comes across a null cell, it actually places a 0, all right? So that's the beauty of the NVL. It's actually very useful. As a matter of fact, I'll give you a quick assignment. I want you to actually, in the output of this report, I want this to, wherever there's a null value in the commission column, I want you to print out no data found, okay? So it's actually going to, for Jones, manager, his salary is this. In the commission column, I want it to say no data found. For Blake, in the commission column, it should say no data found, and so on, all right? So all of the employees that don't make any commission, I want it to say no data found in the commission column. So try this puzzle out. And this is going to require you to use the toCar function that we looked at in the previous lesson. And that's going to be wrapped by this NVL function on the outside. So give this puzzle a try. And when you're done, you can resume to watch my solution. All right, hopefully you took a chance to work this out. I'll go over the solution now. Now, the first thing, when you're learning about NVL, you may have thought of just, instead of having a 0, right? What does the NVL do? Well, it looks for where there's empty cells, and then it plugs in the second argument. So we had a 0 there. So instead of a 0, if we want to say no data found, I could just put no data found, right? But this is actually not going to work. If I highlight that and hit run, notice that it's giving me invalid number. And the reason for that is, guess what? This string literal, this is an invalid number, right? This is not a number. This is a string. So we're actually saying that this commission column is supposed to take this string literal, and it's not going to happen. It doesn't work that way because the commission column is actually numbers. That's the data type. That's the only kind of data that could be placed in this commission column. So what we need to do is first convert this to a character representation. All right, let me get rid of this NVL. We first need to do a toChar to convert this particular number to a character. And what is a particular number? Well, that's just the commission column, right? So highlight that, and let's run this, and you'll notice that virtually nothing really changed. This is still showing as is, but the important thing to keep in mind is that this toChar function has converted this data now to a character representation. It's being interpreted as a string. So now that it's being interpreted as a string literal, we can use the NVL function. And we put the NVL outside. And what is the first argument? Well, the first argument is the actual data that we want to be replaced when it's empty. So this is what is the first argument, and the second argument is the sentence that I told you, no data found. Okay, so this is the first argument, this function invocation, and all it is doing is taking every single cell in here and be interpreting that as a string. Okay, and the second argument is basically going to be the thing that we want to replace empty cells with. So this cell right here, this one, and this one will contain no data found when I run this. So highlight that, hit run, and notice that it's working as expected. So hopefully you got that. There's another variation to the NVL function called the NVL2, which is not used as often as NVL, but you can look into that. You can Google it or go to the Tech on the Net website and research that yourself. But I'm going to skip over that for now. That's not as important as the next function that we're about to cover, and that's called NULLIF. And this function does exactly what it sounds like. Null if a particular condition is true, okay? And in these parentheses, it takes two arguments, the first argument and the second argument, and both of them are going to be compared. So if argument 1, whatever it is, if that's equal to argument 2, then the output of this function call is actually going to be null. Okay, so it's going to return a null data in the case where both of these arguments are equal to one another. So let's select star from, let me just select some data here. Select ename, and then I want to use the length function that you've seen, length of this ename data from emp. So let's run this and notice that it gives us the ename column, and then the length of the column, the data that's in there. So King here is 4 characters, Blake is 5 characters, Clark is 5 characters long, Ford is 4 characters long, and so on. The NULLIF function basically returns an empty cell in the case that a particular value is matched. Okay, let me show you what that means. So I'll have another column here called NULLIF, and then I'll give it some arguments. So this is going to be the third column that we're defining in the report output. So NULLIF, the length of the ename is equal to 5. Okay, so the first argument is the data that we want to compare with the second argument. Okay, so both of these are being compared. You can put the 5 as the first argument and put length ename as the second argument. It doesn't really matter the order. The first argument is going to be compared with the second argument, and in the case that they match, in the case that the length of the employee name is equal to 5, it's actually going to give an empty cell in the output. Okay, so highlight that, hit run, and notice that wherever the length of the ename was 5, it actually returned a null. All right, as you can see right here. So I want to give you another puzzle here. Using the NVL function, I want you to print out on the third column the sentence length equals to 5 in the case that, it's null. So you can leave this as is. This is solving a part of the problem where the length of the employee name is equal to 5. Now you just have to use the NVL function to print to the screen here where it's empty, right? So anywhere where it's null, I want you to print the words length equals to 5. So try this puzzle out on your own, and then you can resume to watch my solution. Alright, so hopefully you had a chance to work on this. The first thing we need is NVL function outside of that NULLIF, okay? So the first argument, what is the first argument that NVL gets? Well, it's the data that we're working with. And in the case that what this returns is a null, when this returns a null, we actually want to show something. And what that something is going to be is length equals to 5. So we can do length is 5 or something like that, okay? Again, what are we doing here? We have the NVL function, and the first argument is the NULLIF statement. This is going to return either the number 5 or it's just going to return null, okay? So if length of ename is equal to the number 5, it's going to return null. Otherwise, it will return the length of ename, okay? So when it returns null, in the case that it returns null, what are we doing? Well, we're using the NVL function, so it's going to replace everywhere where there's null, it's going to try to replace using this string here. So highlight this and take a guess as to what's going to happen when I run this. Well, let's see. Whoop, actually, since I have logged out for some time, I took a pause and I came back to this video. It actually logged me out, and you may have noticed this as well. So let me just first copy this statement, and we'll go ahead and sign in again. I'm going to close this, and I'm going to expand this screen here, and let's just sign in again. And go to SQL Workshop, SQL Commands, and we can type that here again. But anyway, let's hit run, and let's see what gets printed. Notice, you've seen this error before, invalid number. Take a guess as to why it's showing invalid number. Well, the reason it's showing invalid number is because guess what? In the case that the value is not null, it's actually going to return a number, right? The length function returns a number, so that considers this column to be a numeric column. So what we need to do is we need to convert this to a character. So we could do to car like that. As a matter of fact, the length of ename is going to be a number, okay? And the number is never going to be equal to the character 5. And I'll show you, I'll prove it. Highlight this and hit run. See, it says inconsistent data types, expected number, got car. So the length of ename, what is that? That's going to return a number. But with this to car, we're converting the number 5 to a character. So we need that on both sides. Let me copy that. Whoops, I actually cut it, but I'll paste it back. We need the car on both sides, outside of this length function, as well as for here, to car. And now we're comparing apples with apples. This is going to be a string, and if this string is equal to this string, only then it's going to be a null, and in the case that it is a null, it's going to print out this. Otherwise, it's just going to print out the length of the ename. So I know this is a hairy example, but don't worry, we're going to get plenty more practice, and this is how you learn. Let's hit the run button, and notice now it's working as expected. Anywhere where the length is 5, it's actually printing out the length 5, and otherwise it's printing out just the actual length of the word. All right. So this is a good example. If you didn't get it right now, you may have to watch the video again and grasp how functions work. But this is a great example to revisit sometime later on when you get more practice with SQL. And when I present to you this assignment, take a pause and try this out on your own again, and that will serve as great practice. So we talked about single row functions throughout the last several lessons. Okay, these are all single row functions. They operate on every single row of the table, right? Or the search criteria. So if I add a where clause down here, that's going to limit the number of rows returned depending on what I select. If I do where Sal is greater than 2000, right? This is going to reduce the number of results returned. So hit run, and notice that now we only get 6 rows. Okay. King, Blake, Clark, Jones, Scott, and Ford all make greater than 2,000. And to just see what salaries those are, I can actually put a comma here and just put Sal. And highlight that and hit run. And notice that these salaries are in fact all greater than 2,000. And these are the only records that qualify. And this functions here, these are going to apply on only these particular records. Okay. And let me give this this column an alias just so it looks prettier. And I'm just going to call it as result. Just like that. It's just easier to read. So let's hit run and notice that it's printed in a more reader-friendly way. So there we have it. We covered single row functions, and now it's time to start moving on to grouping functions. All right. So just a quick review. Single row functions do exactly what they sound like. They work on a single row at a time. So you give a particular row as input and it returns that row as output modified in some way or form. Okay. So if you give single row functions as input 10 rows, it's going to return 10 rows. Grouping functions work differently. If you give 10 rows to a grouping function, it's going to return you one value. All right. That's what grouping does. It basically groups the rows that you give it, and it basically returns you a single value. And we're going to take a look at those starting up in the next lesson. So stay tuned. I'll see you soon.